First of all, to the family of Deja Miller, deceased, on behalf of the Detroit Police Department, and then being a father myself, I offer our sincerest condolences by what all apparent preliminary investigation indicates is a very tragic and unfortunate incident, but nothing intended at all. There was a fish fry at an off-duty officer's home on his private property, and Ms. Miller was in attendance. And according to our preliminary investigation, as has been released to you, somehow in the course of dancing with the individual to his rear and touching his waist, his Detroit Police Department issued weapon discharged one time, striking Ms. Miller, as we all know, was a fatal wound. By all indications from the preliminary investigation, there is absolutely no indication, number one, that the officer placed his hand on his weapon at all. Again, these are preliminary findings. I want to be very clear. There will be a complete and thorough investigation by Internal Affairs. The investigative report at the appropriate time will be turned over to the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office for appropriate review, investigation, and disposition. The medical examiner will give us a final determination relative to cause of death. And the forensics related to this case obviously will be handled by the Michigan State Police Crime Lab. So there are a number of independent sources that we will be in consultation with relative to this investigation. The officer, as is with any police-involved shooting, albeit this was off-duty, it was not duty-related, we still thought it necessary to put the officer on administrative restricted duty pending the outcome of the investigation. Without going into any major detail, I don't want to breach the officer's confidence. However, needless to say, the incident, he is very remorseful of the incident and the tragic nature of this young lady losing her life in the manner that she did. As a matter of fact, relative to the department-issued weapons that we carry, they do not have safeties. The safety is built into the trigger. As a matter of fact, in general, we also understand that a weapon cannot, or in 99.9% of instances, does not go off without that trigger being engaged in some manner. Last thing, the holster, which is on evidence with the weapon, it is a very soft neoprene type of material, and the trigger protection on it, and I don't think I'm giving anything away by saying this, but I think it's important for transparency, it is possible still for the trigger to be manipulated with that type of holster. So there are different types of holsters. Last thing I'll say before I take questions, it is the policy of the Detroit Police Department that carrying your weapon off-duty is at the option of the officer. But any off-duty weapon that is carried is one that has to be qualified with in accordance with department policy. Obviously, by this being a department-issued weapon, the officer must have had to have qualified with it as his primary weapon, and he's authorized to carry it off-duty. Last thing, again, this was on private property, so there are some issues legally that we can't go into relative to private property rights and carrying on your private property. And that is all I'm really at liberty to talk about at this point. But I thought it was very important for us as a police department to be transparent about this, to speak about this, but also lend our condolences to the family for what appears to be a very tragic and unfortunate accidental incident.
So the gun was in the waist, not, as some people have said, in the shoulder?
Not in the shoulder holster. It was right side waist.
Chief, holster department issue?
There are no department-issued off-duty holsters. There is no policy that delineates the type of off-duty holster that an officer wears. There are a number of different weapons that officers carry off-duty, so But that is something from a policy standpoint that obviously we will revisit because of the nature of this incident, which appears to be, again, a very tragic accident, but we will revisit everything relative to department policy that could possibly relate to this.
Does it make sense to you, the way that this apparently happened, and is it common? I mean, does this happen often?
No, obviously no. There's nothing common about this at all. It is, I mean, again, based on the preliminary findings, as indicated and validated by witnesses also, by witness accounts, that is what has transpired. But again, we are early in our investigation. We have not reached final conclusions on anything, but I thought it was very important to clear up some things, i.e., a shoulder holster. There was no shoulder holster involved.
Did he have a jacket or anything covering his weapon?
Again, it was concealed. I'll leave it at that.
So it was inside.
I have to leave it at that, Corey. It was concealed.
Where's the gun? Manipulated the trigger herself when they were dancing, while they were at?
We have not narrowed anything down. All possibilities are obviously in play. But again, the trigger had to have been engaged in some manner for the weapon to fire.
When a gun is being in a holster on the waist, is there a typical area that a gun would be pointed at? Is it typically down?
I mean, it's simply, if you know, again, I don't want to speculate as to the specifics of this case. It is still a lot of things yet to be investigated. This investigation is very early. Typically, when your weapon is inside the pant, the barrel direction is down. But again, as was indicated through preliminary findings, there was some manipulation along the officer's waistline that he did not control, and subsequent to that, the weapon fired.
You mentioned
Just
about
to
this-
recap, did she embrace him from behind, and did her hand touch his weapon?
That is the preliminary findings.
You mentioned this was a fish fry. Was there drinking going on, and if so, had the officer been drinking?
All of these things are a part of the investigation, so I'm not at liberty to go into details of the investigation. At the point that we have a full investigation where we can comment further, I will.
Is there anybody else who may have engaged the weapon? You said the officer didn't touch it, but is there anybody else besides the victim who might have?
According to our preliminary investigation, this is the only encounter that we can plausibly come up with that is supported by evidence, and that is supported by evidence gathered and supported by eyewitness account.
Did the police state where the young lady was struck by the weapon?
I think in the chest.
Is everyone being cooperative who were at the party?
Oh, absolutely. There was unequivocal cooperation. Obviously, from what I've been told by investigators, a lot of shock in the air. I mean, a great deal of cooperation. There's nothing really, remarkable about the circumstance, absent what happened, which is just an unbelievable set of
How
circumstances.
many people were at the fish fry?
I don't have those numbers.
She, in a situation where someone comes from behind, you say her hand touched the weapon, how would she have been shot in the chest if the weapon was pointing down?
Again,
Twisted her.
you're getting you're too deep in the weeds. We have a preliminary investigation, which I've indicated what the preliminary findings are. When we have a final investigation, we will certainly be amenable to sharing all of those details that we can share. But I think it's very important at this point for us as a department to embrace what happened, to take a look at every possible scenario, balance with what the witnesses' accounts are, make our investigative findings known to the prosecutor, and what the evidence presents, it presents, and we will do what's necessary as a department. But again, lastly, there's not much more I can answer relative to questions. Again, to the family of Adasia Miller, we are profoundly sad at their loss. We promise a complete and thorough investigation relative to what has happened. It is something that is unfathomable to any parent in here that has a child, to have such a tragic set of circumstances present themselves that seem to be very senseless and should not have happened, but it did. Thank you. Thank you.